What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Stan R. Mitchell Show. My name is Stan, and this week we are talking about so many different topics. So there will be timestamps if you want to jump ahead. I completely get it. I just couldn't really condense it down to just a few stories this week, so we're going to hit quite a few different things at varying lengths of time. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't signed up for the free email list, go to Substack following the episode notes link. Click that link. You can enter your email, and it's for free, doesn't cost you anything. And that way, if we have any major updates that I need to just send out just a quick news article about or something, that would be awesome to have that email address from you. Again, you don't have to pay. Speaking of paying, I want to give a shout out to April Gibson for signing up this past week as a paid subscriber. I sent her an email to thank her, and she's like, hey, you can give me a shout out if you want, and said that she wanted to be my number one fan of the show. I will say, as a little bit of background, that a lot of times as a creator, and I've heard other creators are the same way, but sometimes you're like, is this making much of a difference? Is this worth the time and effort I'm putting into it? And past week, I was like having those thoughts, and I'm terrible at ever asking for help or praying for help. But I was like, a little sign would be nice. God, I hate that I'm weak. I hate that I need encouragement sometimes, but I am human, I guess. And it was shortly after that I got the new paid subscriber. And so I want to thank April Gibson for subscribing as a paid subscriber. That's $5 a month for those if you're listening for the first time. I want to thank her, and also thank her for the idea of doing a public shout out. I never even thought of doing that. And I thanked her, and she mentioned it just as a passing comment that I could mention her name if I wanted to, and I was like, well, that's a great idea. So if you're a current paid subscriber and you want to shout out, I would be honored to do that. If you want to sign up, become one, and want to do a shout out, I'd be honored to do that as well. And thanks again, April, for signing up. I truly do appreciate that. And whether you realized it or not, I think God probably used you that day to help lift my mental spirits and give me a boost about the show. Let's begin with some listener feedback from the last episode. As you recall, last week I had a section called The Public Sours on the Iran war, and I talked about the trap that the president is in many regards with our actions over there. And I got a couple of different pieces of listener feedback from regular listeners whose names I know, and one of them's a paid subscriber, and I get some pretty regular feedback from both of them from time to time, so that's always really nice. As I often say when I'm replying to a comment or to some feedback I get on social media, I always appreciate feedback because I jokingly say it, but it's true. Feedback helps me keep it between the lines. I don't claim to know everything. It's very hard not to get pulled too far left or right or into this issue or that issue. I just want to be a good, communal place where we can all gather, essentially discuss the same facts, hear both sides, and try to come together, and at least with some type of reasonableness and not too much name calling or any of that stuff. Just be different than all the other angry, over-the-top, loud shows out there. Because ultimately, as a country, we all have to get along, and that's one of the things I aim to do. But I always appreciate feedback. And the first bit of feedback this week comes from John up in the Maine woods, as he likes to say. He's been a long-time paid subscriber, and he shared that one of the things that he found absurd in the defense budget hearing last week was the continual pattern of having no answer about what the goals and plans and strategy are for the administration. And he said Secretary Pete Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Kane, both kept saying things like, quote, "We will execute whatever plan the President of the United States orders us to act on." And John said, "So what's really necessary is the President needs to come before Congress and the people and explain that properly. That having the U.S. Senate try to get answers on those topics from the loyal underlings of the President only led to deflection and answers that weren't sufficient." So, again, I think he's right about that. I've tried to say that several times, probably not that well, but I have tried to say, like, the President needs to explain exactly what we're doing in Iran and make the case to the American public. Was it about regime change? Was it about nuclear weapons? Was it that Israel was going to strike anyway, and so we had to almost join alongside them? Like, what was it, and what are the goals that the Trump administration have right now? Second comment came from a gentleman who said I could use his name. Jeffrey Smith made the comment that it was a good podcast episode last week, but he said, and I actually get his point, I didn't think about it as I was saying it, that it was a little bit depressing that I used the term trap regarding Iran, because he said President Trump voluntarily jumped into it without considering the consequences. He also said that our soldiers and service members deserve a president who values their lives and health more than his personal popularity. So again, that was some feedback from Jeffrey Smith. Again, I always appreciate feedback, as I said. So if you've got some feedback after this week's show, either leave a comment on the episode notes on Substack. You don't even have to be registered to comment there, if I'm not mistaken. So you can drop a comment there. I do monitor that one 100%. Or you can reply to me on any of the major social media channels, and I try to follow those as well. So we're going to kind of ease into the show this week. And our first topic will be about the Saudi nuclear deal, because I think it's revealing, and I will try to keep it as positive as I can. But let's just start with just the facts, and then I will share a few thoughts of mine. So last week on Thursday, the day that the last episode dropped, pretty much out of nowhere, it was announced that the United States and Saudi Arabia had signed a deal to build a civilian nuclear program. The agreement, which Congress would have to review, would reportedly last 30 years, and it would allow American companies to build a uranium enrichment facility inside of Saudi Arabia. There were immediately, of course, folks raising concerns about further proliferation of nuclear weapons, despite there supposedly being safeguards in the deal to prevent it. So that was on Thursday, July 23rd. And I'm emphasizing that because as people spun up, started trying to dig on it, talking about implications of the deal, less than a day later, after getting criticism from both sides of the aisle, both Democrats and Republicans. For instance, Chris Murphy, Democratic senator, he argued it would push Iran closer to a nuclear weapon. On the other side, Republican Senator John Kennedy said he worried about nuclear proliferation because if Saudi Arabia gets it, well then others may want it. After getting all of this criticism, and again, this is within 24 hours, President Trump gets asked about it by the media. I'm going to play this clip.
Mr. President, did you authorize for Secretary Wright to sign the Saudi nuclear deal? If not, why did he sign it?
Well, we didn't talk about it, but it was always understood, and Chris knew, and Saudi Arabia knew, that if they didn't join the Abraham Accords, the deal's not, I'm not going to do the deal.
So then why did he sign it?
Senator John...
Because they understood that in order, subject to Congress and everything else, in order for that deal to go through, they had to sign into the Abraham Accords. And
I'm going to put that clip in the episode notes. But did you hear what he said? They were asked, did you authorize Secretary Wright to sign the Saudi nuclear deal? If not, why did he sign it? And the president answered, this is less than a day later, we didn't talk about it. And of course, there was plenty of reporting afterward that the Saudis had no idea that the Abraham Agreement or Accord was a part of the deal. So the president dropped that on them, even though that wasn't part of the original deal. Now, I know some of the president's fans believe he is a great negotiator. But when you simplify this down, and you think about if a friend did this to you, how mad you would be, it's much clearer. Just a simple example. If I was selling a gun to someone, and they told me they would pay $500 for it, and we had the deal made, and I'm like, good deal, 500, bring me 500 cash, I'll have it ready for you. And then they show up, or maybe call, and don't even show up. And they're like, yeah, you were going to throw in that scope that you have on that other rifle, and then that other $50 knife of yours, right? And you're like, no, that was not the deal made. I mean, if that happened, you would be furious at your friend. And yet the president does that all the time. He will negotiate a deal and then either demand more or wiggle his way out of it after he gets some press coverage for it. And this stuff is, I think it's already catching up to him, but it will catch up to you at some point. We've all had folks who did not keep their word with us. And usually I only have to make that mistake about once or twice. And at least for me anyway, I mean, I might forgive, but I don't forget. And I just can't believe that the president has done this again. Now, none of this may matter anyway, because this is a Republican senator you're about to hear. Seems pretty clear this isn't going to get through Congress. Listen to what he had to say. This is Senator John Kennedy on Sunday.
Because that Saudi civil nuclear deal he was just discussing, it's got to go to you. It's got to go to Congress for approval. Are you comfortable with it?
No. Maybe someday, but not right now. We're bombing a country to keep them from getting a nuclear weapon. But we're signing a deal with another country. I know it's a commercial agreement, but that the world perceives as possibly someday leading to a nuclear weapon. The world's on a hair trigger. The world looks at what's going on in Ukraine, the Middle East. The world looks at America's relationship now with Europe. People are scared. That's why I say hair trigger. And if you're running Japan or South Korea or Australia or Brazil or some countries in Europe, you're at least thinking about the need to acquire a nuclear weapon. Mm-hmm. And then you see this deal with Saudi Arabia, and it's just not good timing. I think someday it might be. I don't think it's going to happen anyway, because the president's conditioned it on Saudi Arabia recognizing Israel, and they're not going to do that.
Well, Saudi has said they'd be willing to, but they want a pathway for the Palestinians. The Israeli politics at the moment don't make that sound.
And the president's going to say, the president's going to point out correctly that we've got 26 of these 1, 2, 3 agreements with other countries.
Yes,
but the timing's not good.
Understood.
Again, it probably doesn't matter with this deal, but the number of mistakes made are just, you could make a list of them. Not authorizing the Secretary Wright to sign the deal. Trump says we didn't talk about it. Not telling the Saudis that They also needed to be a part of the Abraham Accords. I mean, just incredible stuff here. Besides that, not even keeping Congress and at least a few senators aware of what you're trying to do, especially in the middle of a war with Iran. To catch them all by surprise like that, it's rarely going to go well. Rarely. There's a reason you keep a few of them informed. They like to feel powerful. They like to feel like they know what's going on. And so I just feel like the president made just a number of mistakes with this. And in the end, what an initiative that he probably wanted to put under his belt as a win has more than likely completely blown up. And he has yet again hurt his ability to negotiate other deals because this has been completely bungled. Let's move now to Iran, the big situation that the Trump administration is still trying to solve or figure out, or whatever word you want to use. They've called it everything from a military operation, military decimation, excursion. It's also been called, quote, not a big thing for the United States. Trump's also called it an excursion that will keep us out of war. So those are the various terms it's been called. The one word he seems to avoid using is the word war. I think we all know there's a number of reasons for that. It's clearly not a very popular thing with most Americans at this point, according to polls across the country, are already opposed to the war. We talked about that some last week, so if you aren't aware of some of those polls, make sure you check out last week's episode. But this week, a couple of interesting things happened. One of which I alluded to last week, which was that the Houthi rebels, you'll hear it said both ways, in Yemen, struck 2 Saudi Arabian oil tankers in the Red Sea. That is the other side of the Middle East. We talked about them potentially closing down that strait. So it's not the Strait of Hormuz, it's the strait on the other side on the Red Sea. So down by Yemen, Houthi rebels struck 2 Saudi Arabian oil tankers. That led to oil prices clearly going up. And then there have been some strikes back and forth between Saudi Arabia and those Houthi rebels. Now, the one thing I didn't expect was that during this past week, the U.S. just stopped bombing Iran for 2 days. And there was quite a lot of intrigue and mystery around that, like what is going on? And the Trump administration said they were negotiating, and Iran is like, we are not negotiating. And so for a couple of days, it was quiet. And then there was talk that we were running out of munitions, both defensive interceptors, but even some of our attack low-flying cruise missiles. And so there was reporting that began to emerge that the admiral in charge of these operations against Iran wanted to keep going and going, hard, keep the fight all out. But Pentagon officials in Washington, D.C. began to leak out that they were running out of the munitions needed in case some type of war were to pop off with China, if China tried to go after Taiwan or something like that. And they didn't want to move all the munitions over to the Middle East into the current war. Of course, at this point, everyone wants to know what is next. I want to start by playing what a Republican, long-time veteran Republican strategist, Mike Murphy. Mike Murphy is a top Republican political consultant. He has managed the strategy for 26 successful governor and Senate races. So, in the highfalutin speak, gubernatorial and senatorial races. 26 of them, including campaigns for Mitt Romney, Jeb Bush, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. So this is not just some low Republican strategist. And Mike Murphy on Hacks on Tap had the following to say, and this will sound, what he says is pretty negative, so for those who don't want to hear the negative, I will share what Ben Shapiro said after these comments from Mike Murphy. But as I often say, I'm not playing comments from super far left progressive folks or anything like that on some of these criticisms and critical comments that are made. These are comments that are coming from the right. So first, Mike Murphy from Hacks on Tap on what Trump should do with the Iran war, although we're not supposed to call it a war.
The entire world has gathered in Washington, D.C. for the funeral for Lindsey Graham. And there's some matters of importance that are happening there, including two big meetings for Trump. He's meeting with Bibi Netanyahu and with Volodymyr Zelensky. Mike, over the weekend, there was a real deliberation in the White House, apparently, about whether to really escalate the war. Trump eventually said, we're not going to escalate the war. Where does that stand now? I mean, does Trump have a plan? Is there a plan to end the war?
No. He has a reality, but not a plan. The reality is he has to camouflage a surrender. That's the reality. They're holding most of the cards, and they have infinite patience, and we have midterm elections where the price of gas is not a small thing. So, we're on like our 28th ceasefire, which is a ceasefire, except nobody ceases firing. They just fire a little slower, or maybe take a day or two off, and Trump watches oil markets and starts thinking he'll live to see another day. So Trump tried the escalation, and I think Dan Kane and the other military leaders came to him and said, you're going to burn through the entire U.S. missile magazine in a few months here. We only make about 500 or 600 major anti-aircraft missile systems a year. We're trying to ramp it up quickly. And when you shoot down $35,000 plywood snowmobile engine drones with $2 million standard missiles, you got a problem, and the Iranians know this. So I think he'll find an old Coast Guard cutter, he'll paint it gray, he'll put Iranian writing on it, he'll sink it in the middle of the Gulf and declare victory and leave, because it's the only way out for him is to camouflage and surrender.
So that was Mike Murphy. Ben Shapiro acknowledges that this is not a good situation. Here are the options as he sees them. And by the way, the option that he supports is an option that you increasingly see some folks on the right mentioning.
Laura Ingraham says the American people are done with war, won't fight it, won't fund it, won't support it, and that this new isolationism is going to win. And it might win, but that kind of thinking is dramatically wrong. It's the kind of wrong that destroys countries, that destroys America. Listen, I get why people feel the way they do. I feel that way. I get it. Okay, gas prices are high. Families are stretched thin. Folks are looking at the grocery bill and their rent. They're thinking, why on earth are we spending blood and treasure halfway around the world and not even getting to the end point? But this is why it's actually imperative that America wins and wins quickly. See, there are three options on offer here. One, we win. We do what we have to do in order to achieve our goals. Two, we fight antiseptically and the war goes on pretty much forever. Three, we go full isolationist and pacifist, and then we continue to fight forever wars forever, because that's what happens. The choice is right there in front of us, which means there's really only one choice: victory.
So I listened to that entire episode of Ben Shapiro's, and essentially he claims that if we leave, it allows Russia and China to reinforce and support Iran, and we're essentially in a worse position now than we were then. And so he makes the case that we need to go all out, although he doesn't go into the details how, but all out into winning the war. That he says Iran is hurting economically, there's fractures in their leadership between the civilian and military sectors, and that we just need to keep pushing. But that the worst thing we can do is this tit-for-tat thing that we're doing where time is not on our side, that we actually need to get the job done. And you will hear increasingly more folks on the right say that. Among the things, so I was looking at some of their posts, like what are they saying? Here are some of the things they're saying. achieve overwhelming air superiority, which clearly Iran doesn't have any type of air force now, but do a better job knocking out radar systems, command and control networks, air defenses, etc. Continue to go after the ballistic missile launchers, the missile production plants, drone factories, the bases of their Iranian Revolutionary Guard bases, the naval forces, although I feel like we've already bombed those, and then weapons depots. Eliminate the nuclear program. There are talks of hitting another site called Pickaxe Mountain, so hit that. You'll hear conservatives say decapitate military leadership, and then just maintain pressure until the regime can no longer function, as well as allow Israel to rejoin the war. Those are the main things I'm hearing from the right. Again, the issue of that is the war's already unpopular, and the president can sense that. I think that's why he's taken his foot off the gas for a couple of days the past week. I think he knows the elections are coming up with the midterms, and I think he knows that if we send ground troops in or try to make this more serious, that the level of popularity will probably continue to decrease. But Ben Shapiro does make a point, or a good point, I think, in that Americans don't like to lose wars. When you look at how, when President Biden withdrew from Afghanistan, it was just, the images were horrible. And Americans don't like to lose. But this is just a terrible situation that the president has got our country in. Ultimately, it's up to him on what the country does from here. I would like to think he would, if we're going to keep fighting or maybe increase the level of pressure, I'd like to think he would address the country. Maybe admit that he was wrong, that this was only going to be a short excursion for 4 to 6 weeks. Rally the country, say we cannot let them let them win, we can't lose, that they are on their last legs, their economy's in shambles, and urge the country on. Those are the kinds of things that he could say that I think Americans would give him some grace and some additional slack to pursue this. But that presents a problem for the president because he does not like to look weak. He does not like to ever admit mistakes. And so I'm not sure he can do that. Not with his personality. I will say this. I heard a political commentator mention this week, and I'm like, you can't disagree with this. There are two people you don't see on the TV screens lately talking about the Iran war, and that is J.D. Vance, and that is also Marco Rubio. This past weekend, it was other spokespeople for the administration. It sure seems like Vance and Rubio are not wanting to get tied down to this situation. So I find that interesting and a little telling. Let's move now to Ukraine. So 3 things I want to talk about regarding Ukraine. First, and we had talked about this, I think 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Senate advanced a bill or some legislation that would tighten sanctions on both Russia and Iran, and also allow tariffs on countries which buy Russian oil and gas. This was, as you recall from a couple of weeks ago, this was legislation that was co-authored by Senator Lindsey Graham, who is the Republican senator from South Carolina who died back second week of July. This was legislation that at the time I talked about, it looked like could pass because people were talking about doing it in honor of him. And also, most senators are not aligned with the president on not supporting Ukraine. Most Republican senators actually want to support Ukraine. And so there was discussion that this could potentially proceed, and it appears that it is beginning to proceed. So that's story 1. Story number 2 is Congress was alerted by the Trump administration that the Pentagon will not finish spending Ukraine funds that Congress authorized. The president said he will not finish spending that $400 million that Congress authorized for aid to Ukraine until he literally leaves office, which is, of course, 2 years from now. And as one analyst said, Congress can, in theory, control the purse strings, but only the president has the power to really spend it. And so, you guys know I support trying to assist Ukraine in its fight against Russia, which illegally and unlawfully invaded it 4 years ago. And it just is beyond frustrating that the president won't even do what Congress voted to do. I think it's a abuse of power myself, but it's, if nothing else, sickening. There are civilians being bombed almost on a daily basis in Ukraine, and it's just, as I've said numerous times, it's the analogy of watching an old man get mugged in the street while you sit in the safety of your home and do nothing. I just find it immoral that we're not doing more to help them as they are being attacked by a larger foe, although, as I said a couple of weeks ago, they have turned the tide of the war through unbelievable sacrifice and sweat and tears and loss. Now, the third thing I want to cover while we're talking about Ukraine is regarding the munitions and the shortages that are being discussed. Former Congressman Adam Kinzinger did a great summary of how this isn't because of Ukraine as to why this is happening, even though some Republicans are blaming it on Ukraine. Adam Kinzinger not only has been following the war closely, he also is a retired Air Force pilot, so he knows of what he is talking about. And here's what he had to say on why it is not because we have supported Ukraine that we are limited on weapons.
Trump and the right now have this thing that they're using to excuse the fact that we've run out of high-quality munitions in Iran, or we're running low on them. And I want to make it clear, the U.S. has plenty of munitions. What we don't have plenty of is these high-grade, expensive standoff munitions that you're only supposed to use to basically destroy things to allow the planes to go in and use the cheaper stuff. Anyway, they keep saying we've given it all to Ukraine, and that is a excuse that, quite honestly, it works because you have to get into the details of why that's not true. You can just say the basic thing and people believe it. But let me tell the truth about that. First off, the vast majority of weapons that we gave to Ukraine was stuff that was about to expire. We gave that to them and purchased ourselves new weapons. In fact, all the money, a significant amount of the money we gave to Ukraine was just simply accounting for replacing the old stuff that was going to expire. But secondly, we gave Ukraine almost nothing in terms of long-range weaponry like we've used in Iran. Again, in Iran, we're firing stuff from outside of the country into the country, hitting what should be high-value targets. We're using the expensive stuff to hit like trucks and things like that because Trump doesn't want to, or else we don't have air supremacy, doesn't want to put planes over Iran anymore. And so you're seeing all these munitions be depleted. That is not what we gave Ukraine. We gave Ukraine artillery rounds, HIMARS, which cannot hit Iran from, where we're based at. It is short-range stuff that they needed. Stinger missiles, so shoulder-fired stuff to shoot down planes, anti-tank missiles. It was not the long-range stuff. We gave them some ATACMs, not many, and it was the old ones. That's a little longer range, but again, all the long-range stuff we did give Ukraine, that wouldn't even account for a half a night of bombing in Iran. So when they try to blame the Biden administration for giving weapons to Ukraine, which is why we've run out, it is a lie. The problem is, if you say one line like that, it sticks in people's head. It's taken me 2.5 minutes to explain why that's not the case. And in this moment where everybody scrolls and moves on and doesn't spend 2.5 minutes to see an explanation, It's those short lines that stick. Don't let them manipulate you. It is a red herring. We're out of weapons because we're using the wrong ones in a war we never should have fought.
So let's move from Ukraine to a story that just, frankly, just irks me to no end. So the Pew Research Center, obviously Pew is one of the number one polling firms out there. They announced in the past week that both Canadians and Mexicans now view China more favorably than they do the United States. I mean, think about that. People in Canada and in Mexico think China. They see them more positively than they see the United States. We're talking about China, a place that has so many human rights violations. They've done mass detention of hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs and Muslim minorities, in throwing them in re-education camps, in vocational centers where they have to work. It's almost like slavery. There's allegations of forced labor, forced sterilization, family separations, restrictions on religious practice. You got suppression in Tibet. You got China taking over Hong Kong, arresting pro-democracy politicians and journalists and activists. There's no freedom of speech. They censor everything. Very little religious freedom. Restrictions on house churches, Christians arrested. There are so many arbitrary detention and legal system concerns in China. There's no independent judiciary. It's all controlled by the Communist Party. There's a surveillance state around the whole place. They use everything from AI facial recognition. They monitor phones. They digitally track everyone. Just unbelievably intense surveillance throughout China. And then there's all kinds of labor concerns of forced labor and just, they will just straight up disappear you in China. They bully their neighbors. I could make the list. I could spend 40 minutes on China. But unfortunately, because the Trump administration has been so antagonistic to our neighbors view China more favorably than they do us. And this just really, really sticks in my craw. I will put in the episode notes the link to that poll, but we shouldn't be surprised on why people feel that way in Canada and in Mexico. And it just really makes me mad when I think about Canada. We have been allied with them since World War II. They shed blood with us, alongside us, on the same beaches, same land, across Europe. They've been a part of NATO. They've been, in almost every war since World War II with us. We have one of the longest, most peaceful borders in the world with Canada. And we have just absolutely slapped them around, politically speaking, ever since Trump got into office. And I know it's popular on X to just troll people and just act like a complete jerk. And that's viewed as strength. But even just this past week, President Trump threatened Canada because there are wildfires up there and because their smoke is coming down into the United States. And this is a country that sends firefighters to help us fight our own fires. Just this past week, he's threatened them with more tariffs. 2 weeks ago, and I'll put this photo in the episode notes so you can see it, there's an image of a meeting inside the White House, and the president has a map of the United States, Canada, and Greenland, and they are all shown with American flags on them, as if we've already taken them over, or occupied them, or invaded them, or just accepted them as a 51st and 52nd state. These people don't want to be a part of America. Even if we'd had a chance at it, the way we have treated them and bullied them the past year plus ended any chance of that. But Canadians especially are very proud people. They don't want to be a part of the United States. And so now, Canadians who used to travel to the United States in large numbers, including various vacation places from beaches on the east and west coast to Vegas, they've stopped traveling here. I have no idea why we have done what we have done to Canada. It is foolishness. And I like a term that was said this week by David French. He's a former Republican, and he called it malicious American dominance. The past year, we have just, with all of our allies in Europe, just across the board, we have just had malicious American dominance. We've acted like total a-holes to all these countries that were our allies, that we had shed blood with. We have treated them horrifically. We've canceled trade deals. We've thrown tariffs on them. We've demanded they spend more on defense. We've insulted the United Kingdom and France. We said that we didn't even need their help, that we'd already won the war in Iran. It would be nice to have their help right now, don't you think? It's just the arrogance. And I always try to pull things back to just normal human behavior. Can you imagine a new neighbor in town, or maybe just the neighbor that you thought you knew that would been friendly for a long time? Maybe they get a tumor in their head or whatever. But suddenly they're just insulting you all the time, and they're saying they're going to own your property, or they want your property, and all these deals you had in place, they're null and void, and we're going to redo everything. I mean, and they're constantly insulting you. I mean, is that the kind of neighbor you want? Malicious American dominance. And I get it. I know that when Obama was president, the apology tour and America was weak, or ever how you want to spin it or say it. I've heard all that. But this is too much. And if you're one of those people that cheer it on, or think it's funny, or not that big a deal, I would just say check your heart. If you're one of those Christians who feel that it's fine, it's not a big deal, I would say read your Bible. I mean, let me just speak to the Christians for a second. Because Jesus himself, in the book of Matthew, chapter 5, jump to verse 40. These are the words of Jesus. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it for 2 miles. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. Now I know you can't take just those verses to apply to rules of governing bodies or governments which were established by God to protect people and to punish evil. But what has Canada done to us? What has Mexico done to us? Why do we have to act the way we have acted? This is not strength. This is not Christian for sure. I don't get it. But it's not just a spiritual or moral issue. It's just a practical one. Canada, as a country, is pivoting toward China, who is at a minimum a peer competitor of ours, if not an enemy. Canada is seeking to improve relations with China. China has reduced tariffs on some Canadian goods. Canada is lowering tariffs on some Chinese electric vehicles. Both countries are easing trade restrictions. So this whole strategy isn't even working. It's foolish. I would argue it's wrong morally, but it's foolish. It makes no sense. I think I will end the podcast on that note. I think all of us should check our hearts, especially if you're a Christian. And especially if you have thought some of this behavior humorous or funny or just light, a little bit of comedy, lighthearted comedy. It's hurting our country. It's not a troll account on X. There are national and international consequences to the actions that our president is taking. I just ask that everyone consider that as you watch or cheer on or criticize the president and what he's doing. Thanks for joining me this week. If you'd like to support the work, there's a link in the episode notes. I always like to end each episode by saying that as you head into the coming days, try to be just a little kinder, both online and also out in the world. Remember that most Americans are good people, even if they vote differently than you do. Aim to be a little bit more disciplined this week than you were last week. Mentally, physically, and spiritually, raise the bar just a little. You don't have to be perfect. You just need to aim to be a little better than you were last week. When you fall short, forgive yourself quickly. Start again. Now, when the news discourages you, and I believe it will, because even on the best of weeks, the media is looking for bad news. But when the news discourages you, don't give up on this country. Try to remember that division weakens us. Unity strengthens us. This is wisdom, and it's also biblical. So guard what you feed your mind and your spirit. What you take in and absorb will shape what you become. Don't ingest poison. And that's mostly what cable news is. If you are a person of faith, make sure you make some time this week to spend time in your Bible. If you are not, try reading the Bible this week for the first time, or for the first time in a long time. You know what kind of results you're getting with what you've been doing. It might be time to try something new. Now, before we leave, I need to mention, on the off chance that you don't know, that I am an author in addition to being a podcaster. I write compelling stories that matter about courage, faith, and the fight for what's right. I've written 12 books to date. They are military thrillers, police detective mysteries or whodunits, war literature, a western. One of them is even a motivational self-help book. And I've been fortunate to have sold more than 70,000 copies to date. So thank you if you're one of those who have purchased one of my books. All of my books are available for sale on Amazon, but if you go there, the list can be a little overwhelming. So people say, what book do you recommend, Stan? I would recommend one of my top-selling books called Little Man and the Dixon County War. It is a fast-moving Western. It has tons of action, and it has one of the best unexpected endings that you will ever see. In fact, I was blessed enough that at one point this book climbed as high as number 16 on the Amazon UK paid list in the United Kingdom, and that was with no outside marketing, no book publisher pushing it, nothing. That was word of mouth and people talking about it on social media. So that's the book I recommend when people say, Stan, what book should I start with? I should also say before we end the show that if you believe what I'm doing on this podcast matters in this moment for our country, you could partner with the mission to help keep the show independent and steady. You can do that through either a monthly or one-time gift, and there are several ways to support the show in the episode notes. No pressure to do so, just huge gratitude if you do. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay humble, and keep working to be the light in your corner of the world. You've been listening to the Stan R. Mitchell Show.